Abraham Bram Stoker, born on the 8th of November 1847, was an Irish author most famous for his Gothic novel Dracula, published in 1897, when Stoker was 50. In his early life, Bram was bedridden with an unknown illness until he started school. He said of this later that the long periods of boredom helped hone his imagination. He made a full recovery, though, and was sent to a private school and educated by a reverend. While a student at university, Stoker became interested in theatre and started a job as a theatre critic for the Dublin Evening Mail, which was co-owned by Sheridan Le Fanu, the author of Carmilla. In 1876, when Stoker was 29, he wrote a favourable review of Henry Irving's Hamlet, which was the start of one of the most important working relationships of Stoker's life, if not the most important. He moved to London with his new wife Florence Balcombe in 1878 to become the business manager of Irving's theatre in London, the Lyceum. Florence was a celebrated beauty, and her former suitors included Oscar Wilde. Notably, Wilde was a bit annoyed that Stoker, who he knew from university, had married his ex, but they soon resumed their acquaintanceship, and Stoker even visited him on the continent after his fall. In 1879, the couple had a son who they christened Irving Noel Thornby Stoker. Irving Noel Thornley Stoker, Thornley after his older brother, who was a medical writer, and Irving after Henry Irving, who he idolised. A combination of the strong male friendships in his life and his sexless marriage led many critics to speculate that Stoker was, in fact, a repressed homosexual, which could explain the homosexual themes present in Dracula. Stoker died in 1912 in London following a number of strokes. Some attribute this to tertiary syphilis, others to overwork. He was cremated, and his ashes are displayed at Golders Green Crematorium along with his sons.
In 1897, the year Dracula was published, was the height of the British Empire's expansion. However, at the same time, a steady rise in immigration brought unfamiliar races and cultures onto British soil. In England, as in America, the turn of the century saw a sometimes violent reaction against the foreigner. Dracula, as an immigrant from the easternmost edge of Europe, represents many of the popular prejudices against outsiders. A year after Dracula's publication, British author H.G. Wells exploited similar anxieties in his alien invasion novel, The War of the Worlds. 1895 was also the year that Oscar Wilde, a product of the same Dublin society as Stoker, was prosecuted for homosexuality. Wilder, then an international celebrity, was ruined by the trial, served 2 years in prison, and died in obscurity a few years later. The publicity and hostility surrounding the trial must have had an impact on Stoker, and Dracula shows the evidence of the author's suspicion and anxiety toward all forms of sexuality, especially those considered perverse. The vampire's hypnotic power, his preference for young female victims, and the sensuality of many of the descriptions of blood-sucking suggest that Stoker had more on his mind than monsters. If, as his critics have suggested, Dracula is modelled on Stoker's revered but demanding employer, the actor Henry Irving, then it is certainly possible that the evil attractions of the Count indicate Stoker's fears about his own sexuality. It is impossible to say that Count Dracula is simply a symbol for something else, whether foreign influence or repressed homosexuality. Dracula is a fully realized character, more so than even the book's heroes. And the vampire myth does date back centuries in Europe, but the specific forms that Dracula's threat takes in Stoker's novel, the invasion from the east, the power of hypnotic suggestion, the sexually tinged assault on women, reflect the concerns of the place and time in which the novel was written.
Dracula was influenced by a wide range of literary contexts. Many of these were earlier vampire texts, including Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, which explored a Byronic vampire with seductive capabilities similar to the Count's in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu also had significant influence over Stoker's novel. This text explored the female vampire with overtones of lesbianism and was an evident inspiration for Lucy. Both are presented as waif-like victims and seducers who sleepwalk. Stoker replicates the relationship between Carmilla and Laura with Lucy and Mina in the novel, as well as using the characters of Karnstein and Reinfeldt as a template for Carfax and Renfield. Dracula also contains biblical allusions, such as the mark on Mina's forehead representing the mark of Cain and a physical representation of sin. Moreover, Stoker's exploration of fears in openness and sexuality in marriage, particularly through the character of Lucy, is influenced by Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. Themes of transformations and the liminal between good and evil are also influenced by earlier Gothic texts such as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Stoker uses the form of an epistolary novel, evidently influenced by the structure of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is also impacted by the fact that Stoker used to work as a journalist for the Daily Telegraph in the 1890s, providing inspiration for the variety of narratives in the novel, including newspaper articles. This form moves away from traditional narrative styles, allowing the reader to understand different characters' motivations. Moreover, the diary entry aspect of this form explores an unreliable narrative, blurring the lines between reality and imagination and creating a sense of obscurity. Stoker also uses a detective-style form influenced by the Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. Doyle even wrote about vampires in The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire, 1924. Stoker even alludes to the Sherlock story Hound of Baskervilles with the scene of an escaped wolf. Dracula uses the Gothic form, however it is subverted from the typical Gothic novel, with Harker being presented as a male damsel in distress figure. Moreover, Stoker is influenced by Poe's rendition of the urban Gothic, using cityscapes as Gothic settings when Dracula comes to London.